My parents left a $5 million fortune to my sister and gave me a broken-down shack. You always were the family disgrace, she sneered. But in the basement, I found something that made me richer than all of them. What happened? My parents passed away recently, and when the will was read, they left $5 million to my sister, Clara, and gave me an old, broken-down cabin in the mountains. It was their way of telling me I wasn't worthy of anything more. I know the history. My sister's always been the perfect one, the one who did everything right and made them proud. I was the screw-up, the rebel, the one who always did things my own way. But when I went to that cabin to clean it out, I found something that completely changed everything, and it wasn't just a bunch of junk. It had been a few days since the funeral, but I still couldn't believe it. My parents were gone, and with them, all the tension they'd carried in their hearts for years. The awkwardness in the air felt different, heavier now that they were gone. Clara was already handling most of the funeral details, even though she lived out of state. I could tell it bothered her to be back here. She'd always been more distant from them than I had, but when the will was read, she suddenly became the dutiful daughter, doing everything she could to keep their memory pristine. I, on the other hand, had been the one who lived closest to them. I was the one who spent hours sitting with my mother when she was sick, the one who took care of the house when it needed repairs. But my mom had always made it clear she wasn't happy with my choices in life. She wanted me to settle down, marry the right person, take a respectable job. And then there was my dad. He loved me in his own way, but he was cold, distant, like a man who had checked out of life a long time ago. When the will was read, Clara was sitting beside me, her eyes on the lawyer's face, her expression unreadable. The lawyer began with her name. Clara was going to inherit everything, including the family house, the savings, the investments, all of it. And Maya, he said, flipping a page. You are to inherit the cabin in the mountains. The cabin. The shack, really. I had forgotten about it. It was a place my parents had purchased years ago as a retreat, but it had fallen into disrepair over time. When I was younger, it was a magical spot. The cabin was a place where we spent summers, having barbecues and playing board games. But now? It was nothing more than a decaying building surrounded by overgrown trees and a long, cracked dirt road. The thought of inheriting it, of all things, stung. Clara knew exactly what it meant. She gave me a quick, disdainful glance and smirked. You always were the family disgrace, she said under her breath, her voice laced with superiority. That shack is the best you'll ever get. I didn't respond. What was the point? We both knew it was true. My life hadn't turned out like Clara's, perfect, successful, always in control. And to them, that made me lesser. But I wasn't going to let that show. When I got to the cabin a few days later, I had no idea what to expect. I hadn't been there in over a decade. The moment I stepped onto the porch, I felt a wave of nostalgia, but it quickly turned to disappointment as I took in the state of things. The porch boards creaked under my feet. There were holes in the roof. The windows were cracked, and weeds had taken over the yard. This was it. This was my inheritance. I went inside and immediately started to feel the weight of everything. There were old boxes piled up in the corners, along with furniture covered in dusty sheets. I wandered through the house aimlessly, opening drawers, looking for anything that might give me some direction. Most of it was useless, old papers, photographs, some antiques that hadn't aged well. But then, I remembered the basement. The basement had always been a mysterious place when I was younger. My father had never let us go down there unless it was to grab some canned goods for the summer barbecue or to fetch something that had been stored. It was cold, dark, and smelled musty, but that had always been part of its charm. As I walked down the creaky stairs, the air felt thicker, the silence almost suffocating. The basement was cramped, with boxes and furniture strewn everywhere, but as I started to move things around, I felt something odd, a small wooden chest tucked behind a stack of old chairs. I knelt down, dusting it off. At first, I thought it was just another box of old junk, but when I opened it, I gasped. Inside were pieces of art, paintings, sculptures, and some old framed prints. At first, I thought they were reproductions, just more of my parents' quirky collections. But as I began to carefully inspect them, I realized they were far more valuable than I had ever imagined. Some were by well-known artists, others rare and signed, and a few even looked like original works. My hands trembled as I handled the fragile pieces. This was not just any collection. This was worth millions. I don't know how long I spent in that basement, but when I finally stood up, the reality of the situation hit me. My parents hadn't just left me the cabin, they had hidden a fortune in plain sight. These pieces were worth more than the house, more than everything Clara had inherited. I could barely breathe as I calculated the value in my head. Over the next few days, I did what I had to do. I contacted a few art dealers, had the pieces appraised, and secured them in a climate-controlled storage unit. The more I researched, the more I realized just how significant these items were. This wasn't just some hobby collection. My parents had been savvy investors in art, and they had kept it hidden from everyone, including me. But now, I had it all. I had no idea what to do next. I wasn't going to tell Clara. Not yet. I needed time to process this and figure out my next steps. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd found, and more than that, I couldn't stop thinking about how it would change everything. It was my ticket to freedom, freedom from the expectations my parents had placed on me, freedom from the shadow Clara had cast over me my whole life. When I finally saw Clara again, it was at one of those forced family gatherings she insisted on hosting. She looked perfect, as always. But I wasn't that same person anymore. I wasn't the disappointment who had been left behind with a worthless shack. I was someone who had taken control, who had something real to hold on to. As soon as she saw me, her eyes narrowed. I could see the contempt in them, the judgment. "So, how's the shack?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's a lot better now," I said, my tone cool. "Funny thing is, I've been doing some renovations. I've found some hidden treasures in there." Clara scoffed. "You mean the old junk my parents couldn't get rid of fast enough?" I smiled, trying to keep my excitement in check. "Not exactly." She didn't understand, not yet. But that was fine. There was no rush. I had time. I didn't need her approval anymore. The next few weeks were a blur of appraisals, auctions, and carefully negotiated deals. The money from the artwork came in quickly, and before I knew it, I was financially secure. The shack was no longer just a place of memories. It was mine, and it had given me more than I could have ever imagined. But the best part? I hadn't even told Clara the full truth yet. As I sat there in the living room, scrolling through the recent sales of some of the artwork, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of disbelief. How had my parents kept this hidden for so long? It was almost as though they had deliberately kept me in the dark about their wealth, like they wanted to make sure I never had a piece of the puzzle. I couldn't even tell you why they did it. Maybe it was their way of punishing me, or maybe they were just being their usual distant selves. I didn't hear from Clara for a while after our last conversation. Honestly, I wasn't expecting her to reach out immediately, given her usual attitude toward me. She was still probably under the impression that I was the same naive, broken-down person I used to be. But that didn't matter now. I had changed. The money wasn't just about wealth, it was about reclaiming my independence. It was about breaking free from years of feeling like I didn't matter, of being overlooked and underestimated. Now, I wasn't just someone living in a shack in the mountains. I was someone who had power. I had leverage. In the weeks that followed, I made a few more visits to the cabin, slowly transforming it into a comfortable space. The initial repairs were essential: new windows, a solid roof, insulation for the walls. I hired a few contractors, spending money from the art sales, but it was more than just about fixing a house. It was about taking ownership of my life in a way I never had before. I even started working on the landscaping around the cabin, clearing the overgrown weeds and planting new flowers. For the first time, it felt like home, a place where I could breathe and be myself. Then, one afternoon, the phone rang. It was Clara. "Hey," she said. Her tone was a little different this time, not the usual superior, detached version of Clara, but something softer, almost unsure. "What do you want?" I replied. I wasn't trying to be harsh, but I didn't want her thinking this was just another opportunity for us to play nice. I've been thinking about everything, Maya, she said slowly. Look, I don't know what's going on with you, but I want to talk. I feel like I owe you an apology. I paused. I wasn't sure what to make of this sudden shift. Clara and apologies didn't exactly go hand in hand. An apology? I repeated. For what? For how I treated you over the years, she said, the words coming a bit more carefully than usual. I know I wasn't always fair. I think I've been jealous of you, Maya. I always have been. This was unexpected. Clara, admitting jealousy? For as long as I could remember, she had always been the perfect daughter, the one who got everything she wanted, the one who could do no wrong. The idea that she was jealous of me was something I never even considered. I didn't say anything right away. My heart was racing, but I didn't want to rush into a response. I'm not the same person I used to be, I said finally, my voice steady. And I don't need your approval anymore. I'm doing things for myself now. I'm not going to live in your shadow. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her processing my words, trying to find the right thing to say. I know, Clara said quietly. I've seen the changes. You've really done something with that cabin, haven't you? I glanced out the window at the mountains in the distance. The view from here was stunning, and I felt at peace, like I could finally breathe after all these years. It's more than just a cabin, Clara, I said softly, it's my life now. I'm not looking for approval anymore. I'm happy. I see that, she said. And I guess I respect that. The conversation lingered in my mind for days. I didn't know if Clara was being genuine or if this was just another attempt to make herself feel better. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to figure her out. What mattered was that I was finally living life on my own terms, and that felt like the greatest victory of all. Over the next few weeks, things started to settle into a new normal. I continued working on the cabin, building it into something that felt truly mine, something I could be proud of. Meanwhile, Clara seemed to stay at a distance, still trying to figure out her own place in all of this. The $5 million inheritance hadn't changed her life in the same way it had changed mine. She was still wrapped up in appearances, still holding on to the old family dynamics. But I didn't care. I wasn't part of that world anymore. One day, I found myself sitting on the porch of the cabin, sipping coffee and looking out over the quiet landscape. I had hired a landscaper to help with the front yard, and now, it was slowly becoming the tranquil retreat it had once been. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a text from Clara. Can we meet? I want to talk about the inheritance. I sighed, a little irritated but also curious. Was this about the money, or was it something else? A part of me wanted to ignore her, to just let things be. But another part, one that had never truly let go of our shared past, wondered if there was more to this than just a conversation about money. Maybe Clara was finally ready to see things differently. I debated it for a while before responding, agreeing to meet at a local cafe. When we sat down, Clara looked different. Her hair was messier than usual, and there was a tiredness in her eyes. She wasn't the perfect version of herself today. She looked human. I've been thinking, she began, about what you said. About how I've treated you. She looked down at her hands, then back up at me. I think I was wrong. I raised an eyebrow. You're finally admitting that? She smiled weakly. Yeah. I've always felt like I had to be the best, the one who got everything right. But it wasn't about being perfect, was it? It was about control, about making sure I had more than anyone else. I let her words sink in. Clara was always so sure of herself, so certain that her way was the only way. But now she was questioning everything, admitting that her sense of superiority had been a mask, hiding her insecurities. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "You've had years to realize this." I know, Clara said quietly. "I've been holding on to this idea that I had to be better than everyone else. I didn't want to admit that I was scared, Maya. Scared that I would lose everything my parents built. But now, I see things differently. I see that you found something real. Something more valuable than any of us ever imagined." I didn't know how to respond to her words. There was a part of me that wanted to tell her how much her words meant, but there was another part that wanted to keep her at arm's length. She had hurt me for so long, and I wasn't sure if I could ever truly forgive her for it. But as I sat there across from her, I realized something important. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need anything from her anymore. "I don't expect you to change overnight," I said finally. "But I've changed. And that's all that matters." Clara nodded slowly, as if understanding the gravity of what I was saying. She didn't say anything more, and I didn't push her to. We left the cafe without much fanfare, both of us heading in different directions. But as I got into my car, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Things weren't perfect, but they were better. I didn't need to hold on to the past anymore. What mattered was what I was building for myself now. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with the choices I had made. A few weeks passed after that conversation with Clara, and though things seemed to settle down on the surface, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still unfinished business. Clara may have admitted to her jealousy, her insecurities, but I still wasn't sure if she truly understood the full extent of what she had done. She hadn't done anything to fix the years of neglect, the dismissive comments, or the times she'd rubbed her privilege in my face. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't about the inheritance or the art collection that had changed my life. It was about respect. It was about me finally taking control of a narrative that had been written for me by everyone but myself. One evening, I was sitting on the porch of the cabin, feeling the cool evening air and watching the last rays of the sun disappear behind the mountains. The cabin, which had once been a sad symbol of my parents' disregard for me, now felt like a symbol of my independence. I'd poured time, energy, and money into fixing it, turning it into something that was uniquely mine. That's when Clara called again. I almost didn't pick up, but something in my gut told me that this time, it might be different. I was done with being angry at her, but I wasn't done with making sure that she understood the consequences of her actions. "Maya?" Clara's voice came through, shaky. "I need to talk to you. About everything." I sat back in my chair and sighed. I had been waiting for this call, but I wasn't about to give her an easy ride. "All right," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What's on your mind?" "I know I've messed up," she started. "And I want to make things right. I've been thinking about everything, about the will, about how I treated you all these years, and about the art collection. I didn't know it was worth so much. I didn't know it was all hidden there." I could hear the guilt in her voice. But even as she spoke, I knew that this wasn't enough. Apologies weren't enough for what she had done. The wealth, the control, the years of subtle manipulation, none of that could just be wiped away with a few words. "I don't know if you can make things right, Clara," I said, the words hanging in the air. "But I'm listening." There was a pause on the line, and I could hear her breathing deeply. "I'm sorry," she repeated, this time more quietly. "I should have been a better sister. I should have been there for you, instead of always trying to compete with you." I didn't say anything for a moment. It felt like the conversation had turned a corner, but I wasn't ready to forgive her just yet. I wasn't sure I ever would be. "I think," I said slowly, "you're right about one thing. You've been trying to compete with me. But you're not competing with me anymore, Clara. This is my life now." "I know," she whispered. I guess I don't know what to do with all this money," with all the things I've inherited. I'm just lost. That was when I knew. It wasn't about her. It was about the consequences of her own choices, her arrogance, her feeling entitled to everything simply because of who she was. She had always been the favorite, the one who got everything, while I was left with the scraps. But now? Now, I was the one holding the cards. I had the wealth, the power, and the peace that came with knowing that I was finally free. I've been thinking a lot too, Clara, I said, my voice steady. And I've realized that you can't fix what's been broken. You can't just show up and apologize for the years of hurt you caused. It's not that simple. Her silence on the other end was palpable. She didn't respond right away. You've taken everything from me for years, Clara. My parents, the house, even my own place in this family. You never once cared that I struggled while you thrived. But here's the thing, I'm not competing with you anymore. I'm not trying to win you over or get your approval, I continued. I don't need to. You've already lost. She finally spoke, a quiver in her voice. I don't know what you mean. I said calmly, you've got everything, don't you? The money, the house, the perfect life. But you've also got nothing. You've spent your whole life building a facade, a world where you're always better than me. But that's not real. You don't know how to live a life that's truly yours. The words hung between us, and for a moment, I let them sink in. I didn't want to be cruel, but the reality was that Clara had been the one to set the stage for all of this. She had been the one who thought she could get away with treating me like I didn't matter. And now, the tables had turned. So here's what's going to happen, I said, leaning forward in my chair. You can have your $5 million, your perfect life. But the one thing you'll never have is the respect of this family. You'll never have what I have, peace, independence, a life I built for myself, not for anyone else. And that's something you'll never be able to buy. There was a long pause, and I could hear Clara's shallow breaths. She was rattled. Good. I won't ask for anything, Clara, I continued, my voice even. But I will make sure everyone knows the truth. I'll make sure they understand that I didn't just get a shack. I got something more valuable than anything you could ever inherit. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice trembling. I'm talking about the art collection, I said, smiling to myself as I felt the satisfaction of finally having control over the situation. The one that you had no idea about. The one you probably thought was just a bunch of old junk. Well, it's worth millions, Clara. And I'm keeping it all. That's my inheritance, not yours. I heard her let out a sharp breath. You're lying. I could hear her panic, the reality of the situation sinking in. I'm not lying. I've already sold some of it, and I've got the rest safely stored away. You may have the house and the $5 million, but I have something you can't buy, my freedom. My independence. Clara didn't say anything for a long time. I could hear the shock, the realization hitting her. She had thought she'd won. She had thought that the inheritance was hers, that she had claimed it all. But she hadn't seen me coming. She hadn't realized that I was playing a completely different game. You're not going to do this, she said weakly, finally finding her voice again. You can't just take everything from me. I felt a strange calm wash over me. I'm not taking anything from you, Clara. You've already taken everything from me. I'm just taking what's mine. Finally. There was silence on the line for a while, and I could almost hear her seething with anger, frustration, and defeat. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I had taken control. I had found a way to reclaim my life, to turn the tables and use the very thing she thought would break me to my advantage. The power had shifted. And Clara? She was left with nothing but her own arrogance and a deep, empty silence. The next few months passed in a blur. Clara tried to reach out to me again, but I ignored her calls and messages. She had no place in my life anymore. I had built something for myself, something real. The cabin became my sanctuary, and with the money from the art collection, I traveled, explored, and met new people. I was finally living a life on my terms, and it was everything I had ever wanted. As for Clara? She continued to live her perfect life, but now I knew the truth. She didn't have it all. Not by a long shot. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about making sure that the balance of power finally shifted, about proving that I was more than the family's disappointment, more than the one left with nothing. I wasn't just the screw-up anymore. I was someone who had finally found her own way, and that was worth more than anything. And for once, I didn't need anyone's approval.